Hey, Tawanda, can you hear me?
I sure can. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Yay.
Great, thank you.
Okay, let's go ahead and call this meeting to order. I'm still on? Okay. Um, our first item of business is approval of minutes. Would anyone like to make a motion to approve the minutes from last time?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Member Isaac moved and Member Donaldson seconded. Are there any amendments, questions, concerns about the minutes? Hearing none, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Minutes are approved. Next item of business is discussion of topics and issues, but before we do that, let's clarify a few things now that we're moving to this format of being in person and on Zoom. Tawanda, we had Stephanie over here briefed us on some of the technology and how this will work. So we don't have access to the internet right now. So we do need to be prepared for that the next time we gather here, either by asking the borough if they will give us access to the Wi-Fi, or by agreeing to do things with a paper and pencil. But right now, as we proceed through the meeting, I think I'm the only person who can update any of our collaborative documents. Everyone else is working off of pencil and paper, so that's just something to be aware of that we should probably work out before the next meeting. And Stephanie has agreed that when we get to item number 4, public comment, she's going to help us out by paying attention on Zoom if there are any comments that come through the Zoom to let us know, because those of us who are sitting up here are not on Zoom. We're just being recorded. Any other logistical questions before we get to business now that we're in this new format?
Hey, Emily, can I just jump in real quick? Maybe I might be misunderstanding. Is there no Wi-Fi at Borough Hall?
I'll take that one. There is. It's just I don't have the ability to access it at the moment. So I'll have to get Hinton, either if we use the laptops we normally do, or we'll get the info from Hinton to log on. So it's just a temporary not having it tonight.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
So it sounds like we think we should get access to that Wi-Fi.
One way or another.
Okay. Thank you very much. Anything else, Dawn?
So Emily, just real quick, can we just maybe do just an attendance and check in before we proceed with the other topics?
Absolutely. How are you this evening?
I'm burnt, but I'm good. Thanks for asking.
Okay. Next, I see Raph is present. How are you?
I'm doing well. It's extremely hot.
Doreen is present. How are you?
I am well, thank you.
Tristan is present. How are you?
I'm doing well too.
Great. Raz is present. How are you?
Also doing well, thanks.
And Kendall is present. How are you?
I'm doing well. Not as bold as Raph. I took my jacket off, so kudos to you for bearing with it. It's hot in here.
Yes.
So is there no Wi-Fi and no air conditioning?
Well, there's a little bit of
We've got a bit of air conditioning.
Teeny bit.
And we're joined by our trustee secretary, Fred, and Stephanie assisting us with the Zoom in-person interface here. I'm glad you asked that, Tawanda, because another thing that we should probably add to the agenda moving forward is a kind of greeting, since we kind of did that in person since we're all here. And so I'm glad that you reminded us of that. We should probably do that, add that to the agenda. The next thing we have here is the prioritization exercise continued, and that item goes to me. And really, I think this will be a seamless handoff to Raph, who is going to be leading us through the action plan. I just want to return to that exercise we did last time and kind of re-emphasize again that we're going to have to make choices as we transition from this prioritization exercise to the actual drafting of our action plan. We have a really huge amount of things that we're interested in, and that's wonderful. But I do think that as we move from this exercise to the actual drafting of the action plan, we need to be prepared to take some things off the table. And that doesn't mean forever. That could be, hey, here's something that came up and we don't have time to address it, but we think the borough should devote some attention to it through some other means. And I also just wanted to so remind everyone that we need to streamline, but also open the floor again. If anyone would like to share reactions they've had to our prioritization exercise that maybe have been kind of stewing since our last meeting, or things that you felt didn't get enough attention last time, before we consider that closed and move over to the action plan. So yeah, any thoughts, reactions, lingering concerns about the prioritization exercise?
So I'm actually having trouble opening the document right now. It's a little frustrating. I saw the second column was in there. Someone's sharing their screen.
Oops, that's me.
So I can't access the document right now, but I did see where we put the other column in for, I don't know if we were calling that the micro level.
Yep.
So I threw some stuff in there. I can't see if there's anything else in there. I don't know if that helped guide us some more. Did that help narrow things down, do we think? Or
I think it made clearer what the choices are. But we still have the task of having to make the choices, I think. Okay. I think it's time to hand it over to Raph. You ready?
Sure. So I was asked at the last meeting to prepare some questions that might help us in kind of narrowing down the various things that have been proposed. And so I thought the first question that we might try to answer in a kind of loose way, just trying to get a sense, is are we kind of more interested in what I'll call truth-telling exercises, things that give people in the community opportunities to talk about their stories? Or are we more interested in doing things that look more like policy recommendations? Our charge is to do both of those things, but we should figure out what the relative balance should look like, just roughly. That's one of the first questions, and then I'll kind of get to precise numbers and then the precise ones, etc. But kind of like, where is the balance so far? I noticed that, and then I'll stop talking after I just share one more observation. I noticed that in the original drafting of action items on that shared document, that many of the things were primarily about truth-telling. We were looking to visit business owners and churches and nonprofits to get people's input in their experiences. We were going to do a survey to get input. We're going to invite various speakers to talk more about race relations. So those were all, we kind of were like 90-10 on the truth-telling versus policy. I just want to figure out, is that our considered judgment? So that's the first question.
Do you want to outline all the questions, or let's do it one at a time? What do you think would work best?
I can maybe, just so that everyone has a feel for it, I'll just say maybe I will just say all 5 questions. Maybe that'll be helpful. So once we figured that out, I thought we should then talk about which truth-telling exercises do we want to engage in. Then moving on into the policy sphere, third question is how many topics should we generate recommendations about? Then once we have a number in mind, the thought is, the fourth idea, or fourth question is which topics, which are going to be those topics. And then the final thing is how do we want to generate recommendations for action? In the original, just a comment here, in the original action plan that we were looking at, it seemed to me like the primary way that we were envisioning generating recommendations was via the community survey, where we were soliciting input. And I was wondering, is that the best way? Just asking other people what they would want to see? Or are there other methods that we want to employ? So those are the 5 questions I thought might guide us in narrowing down our action plan.
I'm just wondering how much of that has to be solidified for this stage of the action plan. So I mean, these are really good questions that we're asking. I'm wondering if for the initial piece of the action plan that has to go to council, can we leave it more open and leave it more broad and then dice this apart? Like maybe this is actually part of the action plan. Maybe part of the action plan is figuring out what the action plan is. Is that maybe enough to get us started? Because I think something that we recognized early on was that we have a tall order in a really short period of time. So that's maybe just some comments that I have right now.
So I agree with Tawanda. I think that it would be easier to keep the action plan pretty high level at this point, and then drill down. But I do think we need to answer the questions. But I don't know that we need to answer it in the action plan or prior to the completing of the action plan, which will be high level. I will say that I know some of these things I added in here because I was just brainstorming and thinking, and a lot of where my brain was taking me was in order to be able to recommend, we need to first understand. And so in order to understand, I felt that we needed to get information from our constituents as to what they feel is happening now, what they believe has happened in the past, because most of us haven't been here for an inordinate amount of time, so we don't have that history. And so I just wanted to, I'm of the mind frame of understand and then react and write once I understand. But, at the same time, I think that some of it can be also happening concurrently. Policy analysis, the beginning of drafting, perhaps even someone tasked with doing some research to what other similar commissions have done that might at least at a high level work to some extent in a community like Carlisle. I know we did a small bit of that very early on, but there's a lot more work that can be done in that regard. So I don't know, I guess I said a whole lot to underscore what I agree with Tawanda.
I guess I have 2 thoughts about this strategy. One is, in broad strokes, I think that that's one possible strategy, maybe what I suggested a couple weeks ago. But another thought is maybe it still makes some sense to make some choices, because even the thought that we're going to solicit information, well, there's a lot of different ways to solicit information that are very, very different from one another. So gathering a lot of anecdotal evidence is one sort of thing, whereas there's lots of information that people are not going to be able to know based on their own anecdotal stories. And so are we going to do something that looks a little bit more like research, or finding out about how various institutions work, or finding out things like disparities in the education system won't be discovered by interviewing individual people. And so at least those sorts of choices, I think, should be made, or at the very least, the action plan as jotted out by the steps here make a choice. And I don't know if that's I don't know if now is the right time, but we should, at the very least, if we're not going to make a choice, we should rewrite those in ways that are broader so they don't make a choice in favor of interviews as opposed to more systematic ways.
Raph, I like
Also,
something that you're saying about, I'm sorry, was someone else
no,
getting ready to
go
say?
ahead. Go ahead.
I like what you're saying about the policy piece. And I think if we're doing the policy piece, that has to be backed up with data. I think if you didn't say that, that's what I sort of heard you say. Um, and I think that that's a strong component, because if we're asking, if we do make recommendations to council, we want, those to be backed with, numbers as much as possible. So if we look back at Deputy Mayor Schultz's presentation about the disparities in rates of poverty and employment and median income, like those are numbers, like they're irrefutable. You can't, there's no way around those. And I think those, can inform policy decisions as much as, as we can. Raph, is that kind of where you were thinking?
Yes, that, and part of the concern was that if our primary way of gathering data is finding out people's individual stories, that may not be as helpful for the purposes of policy recommendation. What might be really helpful for the truth-telling type of task.
Could it be both and?
I'm wondering if, so in the draft document there, where it mentions by March 2022, um, solicit and review historical data from the borough, historical society, local academic institutions, and similar entities for additional data to assess. Seems, based on the tenor of this, I think that perhaps if we're going to keep this format for the action plan, that should be moved up. And maybe it should be up there towards the top where it says ongoing. And then perhaps there's another ongoing bullet point that would also speak to looking at the other communities, looking at policies and things. So that way, the ongoing now has a couple of them that are specifically devoted to the research side of things, because you're right, that is as important as the other part if we're going to be able to give some astute recommendations.
Other thoughts?
So, Raph, one of your propositions is just that we think through these quickly. That I'm almost picturing these as levers we can pull as we go through the action plan as to help drive results. Is that the right interpretation?
Yeah, in some ways. The other thought, maybe one other way to think about how these questions are supposed to help is suppose with that item that Kendall just mentioned, reviewing historical data, historical society, academic institutions, about what though? Because we don't. One way to think about it is if we're going to talk about law enforcement, education, the socioeconomic state of the community, those are Herculean tasks, and I would think that it's part of our job at this point to do some narrowing down about which of those things we're going to do, simply because I think, again, that will guide the path of who do we interview, who we interview and why, and what that's used for. Those questions are answered by our priorities, where we're actually going. So if we're trying to figure out things, suppose we just, to pick two examples, suppose we decide we're going to look at things about the public school system and say law enforcement, and those are going to be the areas of focus. That then gives us some idea about who we should interview, what are the types of academic resources to draw upon, and if we're trying to do several other things too, I wonder if they're not going to all be done well. No, maybe the suggestion is we should wait to decide that, but and just kind of draw things more broadly now. But I was wondering, why not, since we have time, why not think about doing that now?
Raph, could some of that be subcommitted out? That if we say we want to do education, if we want to do law enforcement, Like we give that work to a subgroup or a working group, or I can't remember the language that we liked, but could, then that group figures out, okay, what are the key pieces, in public education or in law enforcement that we need to do. And I think that's where Emily's prioritization exercise comes into play, because we can all kind of throw our thoughts and feelings and ideas on the prioritization exercise, but then ultimately it's up to that working group or that subgroup to take those suggestions and then put that into actual work. Just my thought. I feel like I'm talking too much, guys. I'm going on mute.
Can I make a proposal and then tear it apart as you see fit? So I like, Raph, how you've asked us to consider how are we going to spend the balance of our time. And you can think about time balance as something that's ongoing, or you can think of it chronologically in a calendar. So here's a proposal. Why don't we make our next 3 months, August, September, October, truth telling, and let our survey tools and our interviewing tools and the strategies that we use be driven by the initial data that we have that led to the formation of this commission. So we know that there are some topic areas about which there is incredible concern, understandably. So let the information that Deputy Mayor Schultz shared with us at the League of Women Voters meeting drive our interaction with the public. We commit to all hands on deck for 3 months, out making a public tour, collecting information, because we're accountable to the public and they want to be heard, but they also want us to take action. And we don't want to be in a situation where we're taking action without listening, or where all we're doing is listening and not taking action. So maybe we could agree now, let the data we have drive the tools that lead to the interviews and the public information collecting campaign. So that will take us August, September, October. November, let's agree to revisit our prioritization exercise and really pick the things that seem to be the types of things that fit the following description. Big problems that we can actually do something about, that the council actually, or that the borough council actually has some authority to do something about. That doesn't mean we stop the truth-telling part of it. That can be, but it will be moved into ongoing after that. So, sorry, that was a lot of talking, but my basic proposal is use the data we have to drive a 3-month truth-telling process, then commit to a prioritization exercise that might eventually lead to subcommittees. I see that being when subcommittees come in. After we do that listening phase, we'll know what the committee should be.
I agree with you, Emily, because my fear would be if we start running down the path of determining now, then we're putting the cart before the horse. If we say, okay, we're going to focus on police interactions, or we're going to focus on education, but maybe the community doesn't necessarily care about that. Maybe that's not what is of the greatest concern for Carlisle. It might be nationally, but it may not necessarily be locally. So, and our greatest obligation is locally. So, and we'll learn most of that through the truth telling. Now, it doesn't mean we don't still try to address some of those things, but if we don't have the time or the bandwidth to get to it all, then that's where in our report we may have, okay, perhaps our term has expired, and so short of us being recommissioned, these are some future action items we think that the borough needs to consider, the council needs to consider going forward. And perhaps that's where we're going to say police engagement with the community and education and whatever we weren't able to fully flesh out in our process.
Kendall, I agree with that, but the only problem that I see with that is that part of what is foundationally and structurally amiss in the borough is a lack of engagement, is this piece of disengagement. So, looking to the community to provide input period, I think will be a challenge. And I think that's sort of how we've gotten into, when I say we, I'm talking about the borough, how the borough has gotten into a position of doing things that are inclusive, or doing things that on the surface appear to be, but the very people that need to be served or need to be touched by the services or the representation that the borough offers is missing, right? So how can we, I think part of this work is, um, if a tree falls in the forest, does it still make a noise? And recognizing that there is discrimination, there's racism, there's white supremacy in the borough of Carlisle. That when you ask people, if we don't know who to ask, or we're not asking the right questions, we won't get any information that will help lead and guide us in a way of truth and reconciliation.
So one comment I want to make on that too, I think thinking like that would just discredit what has already been done also. Just because we don't have to collect all of this data in the next 3 months, it exists. We can go back to 1760 and start looking at things, and we say 3 months, like that's not a lot of time. I will tell you, in the first week, things will become glaringly obvious as we look. You'll see themes come. Even if we sent out a survey, saw 10 results, you would see the themes already. As a historian, that's what you see really easily. Maybe we can't get to every person, but there is, I've found recently, Dickinson has a very large archives of oral histories by African Americans done in the last 30 years. So we don't really have to start with who's living in Carlisle right now, today, in 2021. I think we can definitely look back, because none of this, the story hasn't changed that much, is what we want this to be, the turning point where the story starts to change. So we can go back. I don't think we have to put it all on ourselves to reach every single citizen and talk to them now. We can definitely start looking at that story, even if we go back, to the 70s, 80s, 90s. That story is still going to be the same. That's still going to be generational. So, will that solve the inclusivity problem right immediately in the next 3 months? No, but that doesn't mean we won't get to hear the story. And I just don't want to lose that I feel like the 70s seems very far away now, but that's a very new story comparatively. And even if we go back to, 1760, 1800, we're going to see the same story with the same themes that are scarily similar to 2020, 2021. So I think, we want that part, and maybe that will be a subcommittee thing. How far do we go back? Do some people go out and talk to people today? Do some people go through the archives? Do some people look at historic policy and policy today? There's some different ways there too. Because, my research on the African American population in Carlisle started in 1760 when I did something, and I was concerned to see that it was the same conversations happening in a newspaper in 1840 that they were today, nationally. So just to think about that too, that we don't have to fix everything as seen in like the last 12 months even, so we can give ourselves, that's a tall order, and it feels scary to be like, we have to talk to everybody, and they might not want to talk to us. What do we do now? But we can really broaden that scope and find a lot of stories that, they may be in their 70s or 80s now, but when they gave that oral history and talked to somebody in the 70s or 80s, they were a teenager, a young adult, just getting out into the world. So I just want to put that out there too, because I don't want us to lose sight that we have an enormous amount of information here already. So nobody panics and is like, can't do that in 3 months. Impossible. It really is possible.
I wonder if, so I agree with what you said, Emily, that proposal of 3 months. I wonder if we could wrap some of your questions with that 3 month plan, because I think it's baked into at least the first couple that you're asking. If we put the policy aside for a moment, and even Tristan, some of the things that you brought up, I think are germane to this conversation. If we do that listing, that it may play really well into that commitment to the 3 months, if that's what we want to commit to.
Yeah, I think that just playing off the last two comments. So supposedly did take the 3 months. My second question is still, which truth-telling exercise or which kind of information gathering exercise do we want to engage in? Tristan was just suggesting us like, well, there's archival work that we could be doing, and there's interviewing stuff that we could be doing, and so I don't know if it's the place of the action plan to specify in more detail that or not, if we want to make decisions of that kind now, if we want to do that. But that question eventually does have to be answered by the group, I take it.
So for clarification, you're asking, might the action plan get down to the granularity of weeks, where like week 1 of August is consider the methods that Tristan's proposing, get an account for a survey tool, so we can build into that 3 months of our truth-telling tour, which doesn't end. I mean, just so we're all clear, like we're just saying we're giving dedicated 3 months where we're not thinking about policy. So that's kind of a question you're putting out for consideration. What level of detail do we want in this plan?
Yes.
I would say, just like, because I've done a lot of different work in a lot of ways, maybe keep it. So say, truth telling using instruments such as oral histories, conversations, survey, because we don't want to lock ourselves into a survey, send it out, wait 3 weeks, and then we have 2 results, and it might be from us. Because sometimes that happens with the survey. I love them, but they're also only as good as the people who want to take them. So maybe if we leave ourselves some flexibility, so then if we have to pivot, and even if we want to talk about oral histories and getting stories, that's not necessarily something everybody is good at either. You have to be a certain kind of person to engage in a good oral history. So maybe we start doing that and we're like, oh gosh, we hate this, we don't know how to ask the questions, if they won't talk to us, nobody will get back to us. Maybe the survey was the way to go. So it might be easier to say we want to do truth telling, but give some options maybe, but leave it open just in case. I always like to leave room to pivot just in case, because you don't know how people will react, and we don't want to be like, oh, now we need to use this survey with three results of all of Carlisle. So that's just my idea, to keep it open. And I think that's where people were saying, leave it high just in case, so we can figure out what works on the ground.
Right. We
I
can always.
do.
Sorry. Go ahead, Tawana.
I think she said go.
Go ahead.
Oh, crap. I gotta think of what I was gonna say. You go ahead.
What is happening right now? I was just gonna say, I think, like when we look at they want a, bylaws, mission statement, and action plan. I think when you put it in that sort of context, that the action plan is very high level, broad, and I also think, if we come back and say, hey, we need to, change our action plan, or we need to look at something differently, I don't think that's going to be a problem. But I think keeping it as open as possible and as high level as possible, I think those are good things.
And that's exactly what my head was at. If we keep that high level, like, I think we could probably put some creative language around all the oral history. Like, you could probably put together a very detailed action plan from your experience. So I think if we just say, generally, history guide, and just hand it off to you in some form, you know what I mean? I think that we can't afford to be high level and then get granular as we are asked.
And one thing to keep in mind with that also, we necessarily don't have to do all the work ourselves. So if we find people who want to do oral history, send them to the Historical Society. We have an oral historian on staff he's trained in that. He knows how to ask the questions. He will film it. So that might even take, obviously we can go out to these homes if we wanted to, but they'll come to the society, or he's gone out to homes, set up a camera in there, ask them the questions, get their stories, have them online and accessible. So that's also something to consider, that yes, we can do that, but also if we just want to gently push it to do it for somebody else. But maybe that's also if we have 10 people who want to do it and we don't have the time, because this is, a commitment on top of working everyday personal life also. We can look at it that way too. So we can say, hey, we found these people. We can partner with other organizations like that and not have to do all the work ourselves, which will be nice because it will be recorded and edited and everything like that. So something to keep in mind too, to take, some of the workload off of us if we really do want to go headstrong in one of those ways. And maybe that will give us then the extra time to then do other forms of truth telling too. So something to keep in mind there.
I am a wee bit concerned about how high we're flying here, and I'm somebody who likes to come a little bit closer to ground, and I do like a little bit more granularity and details, because I'm worried that we don't have enough quality time together. This meeting every other week is what we have. And we don't want to be reinventing the wheel and discussing what are we doing every time we get together. And different people have different understandings of what's broad and what's narrow. So, at a very broad level, what we're doing is engaging in truth telling and reconciliation. So our action plan needs to have more detail than that. I don't think it hurts us to add something into the plan like determine list of individuals and groups with whom we would like to have conversations. And so that we know that when we get together at our second meeting in August, part of what we're going to be doing is reporting out who we met with or deciding who is meeting with whom. So that's just my feeling. If I'm alone in that, that's fine. But I do think we need to have some more specificity.
So maybe just to augment that idea, because I see where you're coming from. Could we make assignments, right? Like go high level with our action plan, but have somebody as the point person to then build out what are those individual steps that would look like, even like in a subcommittee.
My worry with that is that I think we might need all hands on deck right now for everything. Tawanda could probably do it alone, but a lot of us are newer. And so when it comes to like coming up with a list of people, I'd have very little to contribute but on my own. So there are some questions that I think it would be better if we contributed together and worked collaboratively on things like a list of people we should interview.
Would it be better just how you're talking, and maybe it's how I think of things? Should the action items then be per meeting, so our deadlines are meeting to hold ourselves accountable? Because right now it says like August 2021, and to me that's like, okay, August 31st, I have until then. But maybe we say like, we won't know maybe all of our dates, or maybe we say like August meeting, here's what we should be doing until then, August September meeting, here's what we'll do. So then we kind of have deadlines in a way, and just so it's not a arbitrary like month floating in there. I don't know if that would be a better way to set it up.
I just realized I'm making a syllabus.
I like syllabi, so I think that's I make lists and I'm very list oriented. So maybe if we kind of set deadlines like by meeting rather than months, so then we know we're at least making progress and not just saying a month, because then we'll say, oh well, we didn't get it into in August, we'll get into it in September, and then we might start kicking things down the road. And I don't know if those two things are exactly the same, or if I'm just like, give me a date that I have to be held accountable for. I don't know what anybody else thinks about that.
I think a syllabus is good, but I think what goes along with the mission statement and the bylaws is more of like a course description. Like I think I think
we're getting to the bottom of our disagreement.
I'm sorry.
So I think we're getting to the bottom of our disagreement is what we're aiming for, a course description or a syllabus. And I'm arguing syllabus. But Doreen, I saw you were trying to jump in there.
No, I just think that the comment that you said, all hands on deck. I think, in my opinion, we divide and conquer. I think we're just going to get more done if we do that, and then report back. And this can, of course, be incorporated into the syllabus or into whatever. But if we have that, the syllabus or the document, we can say, okay, 3 of us, we're going to work on XYZ. You 3, you 4 are going to work on something else. We're going to come back, share results, and then go from there. I think that will be a better use of our time.
I think eventually we'll get there. But I do think that some things have to be delineated before we can be subdivided. I don't actually think there's a deep disagreement on that point.
If I might jump in. So about what I think the big disagreement is so far, leaving aside this granularity about all hands on deck versus the subdividing, I would have thought, if we're going to use the syllabus course description metaphor, I would have thought that the mission statement was the course description. And so if If the action plan is going to be something more than that, like an actual plan, then there should be steps in the plan. Now, the steps could be as vague as, like, I started jotting down something to be as high level as some people seem to want, and I wrote down something like, the plan is to engage in truth-telling exercises, including surveys, archival research, oral histories, and more systematic research, and then develop policy proposals based on those truth-telling exercises. That's super, super vague. And if that's what people want, I think that can be fine. I do think that more will need to be said under those that look more plan-like. But if what we want for the write-up is that could be one thing.
I love it, and I'll mute.
I guess I was just going to say that, a syllabus can be 1 page or it can be 30 pages, depending on who the professor is. I've seen both. So, I agree that the action plan is the syllabus, but again, what does that even mean? I think what we have as our working document isn't that far off. I mean, I don't know what we're trying to invent here, but I really don't think we need to go a whole lot further. Now, maybe we need a tad bit more granularity, but if we give a deadline for everyone to have it in there by X date, I think we can get there. I don't know that we need to do a whole lot more than that for the purposes of this. Now, we will need to subdivide and all of that, but I'm sorry, go ahead.
I perfectly agree with that. I actually think, I'm not sure if those things that are on the list are the right ones. And I think what was revealed by our prioritization exercise is a bunch of stuff that doesn't rear its head in this syllabus looking plan. So I like the structure of the plan. I just don't know if those are the things that we want to include. And that's, to bring back full circle, why I thought my first question, kind of, are we more interested in truth-telling exercises versus policy? Because 90% of the things on the list that we have now are truth-telling, and they're not very policy recommendations. And I just want to figure out, is that actually our preference, or is that just what kind of came out on the page? And I thought that we might answer that collectively at this stage, but maybe not yet.
And I go back to my earlier statement. I think that's what came out on the page, but I do think we can easily infuse a few extra bullets on here or sections on here to get to that policy side, and again, without totally reinventing what we currently started.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea also to look at, and I am not a math person at all, but percentages, to say a certain percent will be engaging in, the truth telling via conversations, church visits, to the local churches, something like that. Another percentage, of course, with the historical society. And just simply by doing that, we're kind of covering the necessary bases, instead of kind of walking blindly, and continuously, saying the same things over and over again.
Yeah, I think the one comment I made on it, maybe last night, and I think we got to this conclusion at the last meeting, was that it seems like that's all we want to do, but it seems like that's the subpoints of the larger kind of heading. So maybe if we more or less keep all of it, but just repackage it under certain headers that maybe are more broad, so we feel less locked in. So maybe, we're saying, maybe we won't talk to business owners, but it comes out in that research. But if we say, truth telling in these ways, we can then redirect, but we're not saying, yes, we are talking to them by December 2021. So maybe if we keep, don't just delete this action plan off and never look at it again, but for submitting, we just make it a little bit more broad, keep those subpoints, because it's not like those are bad subpoints and it's not the direction we might go in, but just kind of blow it back out just slightly. So I think we got a little granular there, but just blow it out a little bit more, but keep that, because I think those are the important subpoint parts for us internally, but maybe not necessarily to feel locked into by an action plan submitted to the borough. That was kind of my thought last night when I was looking at it after kind of processing that exercise we did at the last meeting.
It occurs to me. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Tawanda.
Sorry, Emily. I think too, we also have to allow some room for sort of what bubbled up from the school district meeting the other week, and something that I'll talk about, a little bit later on in the agenda. But I think we have to allow, bless you, I think we have to allow room for these sort of bubble up, pop up things that could be issues or concerns down the road, that we have the opportunity of talking about and or addressing in real time. So how does that kind of come into the action plan? I don't have the answer. I just think it's something for us to think about.
I think we should assess our level of commitment to onboarding concerns that arise spontaneously, organically. I personally am happy to do that. Just because we have an action plan that says by the end of November we'll do this doesn't mean we can't respond to things that come up. So I'm committed to that. How does everyone else feel about the question of taking on concerns that we didn't delineate in our plan?
Yeah.
I think we're all good with that. Raph, can we get back to your question here? So truth-telling versus policy recommendations. And you said it kind of seemed like perhaps we're more interested in truth-telling because that's the balance of the comments. However, I think that what might be going on is that we wisely have trepidation about rolling out with policy recommendations when we haven't done the truth-telling. So it isn't like, I would say, me personally, I'm probably slightly more interested in policy recommendations, but I don't feel like it's appropriate for me to start there. You have to start with truth-telling so that you can find out what kinds of policy recommendations you should be making.
Yeah, that seems right to me. I guess one of the thoughts I had is maybe we need to figure out what are the kinds of things that we want to talk about to figure out what kind of truth telling we need to find. Because, for instance, if we decide we're interested in policing, for instance, there are some populations that are much more affected by this than others. Then we need to work harder to try to figure out things about them than others, for instance. So I don't know if we go into just like finding out the truth without knowing what truth we want to find, or at least what topics about truth we want to find. I don't know, like how efficient that process would be.
Maybe that could be our next step. I just kind of feel like we are having the same conversation over and over again, and we're not getting anything accomplished. So what if we take the document that we have already created? We already know it's not written in stone, but at least start listing or gathering or coming up with some questions that we can address when we do get to those stages. Because at least that's moving forward a little bit instead of just kind of circling.
That's not my sense of what we're doing, but I hear you.
I couldn't hear that.
I said that's not my sense of what we're doing. I actually think that they're, we're a new group of people who use some of the same vocabulary words, some not. It's not clear that we all are in agreement about what different things mean. Even a question like, how broad is something? How high level is something? I think Kendall put it best with, yeah, it's a syllabus, but some professors have a 1-page syllabus. Some professors have a 30-page syllabus. And I see us not as circling, but as getting to that question of how long is our syllabus going to be? And I think neither 1 page nor 30 pages, somewhere in between there. But I do agree with you, Doreen, that we're getting closer to that.
So what if we, took, let's say, 5 minutes right now to each, access the document, and just start jotting down whether it's, priorities or the order in which we should go, etc., just so that, again, we're moving forward. Like just a few minutes for us to look at what we have, say, okay, this is what I envision, and then compare notes.
How do folks feel about that?
Do we have the capability to do that?
Well,
That's what I was
yeah.
kind of wondering.
Yeah, so
You guys
I have all the
completed it.
things because I printed them,
I
but
forgot.
yeah.
No internet.
So here's two thoughts I had. So one thing we could do is something like that, which to my mind sounds a lot like going through the questions that I already asked us. But the second thing is to do what Kendall said, which I took to be a different suggestion than just going through my questions, which is here's a plan. What we do is we do listening, modified by Emily's point, we do it for 3 months. And whatever comes out of the listening are the topics. And like, so we don't kind of independently assess what the topics would be, which is kind of my question and kind of like Dorian's suggestion as well. But we just take whatever comes out. Like the community is interested in X, so we are going to talk about X over the course of our time. And so like, at the very least, I think we should make a decision between those two things. And maybe there are other proposals too, but maybe at least that can be one thing that we settle as of tonight. Like, which of those strategies makes more sense?
I think that we should do that with a friendly amendment of infusing a concurrent historical assessment, as Tristan was saying, to be able to. So, because as I think Tawanda was saying, we may not get everything from the truth telling that we want, but we know that there's truth in the historical records too. There's truth in the Sentinel articles if we go and scour those. There's truth in a lot of things that we can find. We just need to take that at the same time and do our homework on that end concurrently.
That's what I was going to say too. So we say truth telling. What if we think about it? And I don't know if this means anything to anybody other than me, but if we think about it like as past, recent past, and current, so any of those ways you can, if we want to go back to 1800, we can read and listen there, whether it's newspapers, written articles, secondary sources. If you're like, I think the 80s was a very pivotal moment in Carlisle, you can read, listen there. Or if you're like, no, you know what, today, what's happening right now, I'm going to go out and I'm going to go to a church, I'm going to talk to people, or a community center, and I'm going to talk to people. Maybe if we don't limit ourselves to a time period, but it's really just 3 months of data collection, and maybe, Emily, you're more interested in policy, and you're like, well, I want to see what's written in the policy. So maybe you're looking at like how the policy has transformed or what it is today as opposed to what it's been. So maybe we kind of blow out truth telling to just general data collection, and maybe most of us do want to do more present. I see it, we are informed by what has happened 200 years ago, and that's probably just me, but if we can let ourselves just be like, listen to whatever is available to us, and then I think we can come together, and maybe you spend 1 week present, 1 week past, 1 week 80s, 50s, so then we can get really a broad story and kind of share with each other, and I'd almost do many, if we're talking about the syllabus, it's history week of, how did we get here, what are we doing, what are the conversations that are happening. If we're all looking at the same things and we all see the same 3 themes, that's going to tell us a lot. So maybe just become more aware, understand what Carlisle is like, and maybe that's where we pull in speakers too. So I know there's, professors doing great things at Dickinson. Maybe it's Truth and Reconciliation people where they have started with it. Have they started in the last 10 years? Are they looking further out? So maybe that's where we can also inform ourselves with other speakers too. Because we were already saying collect them and where they see fit. Maybe we kind of do it like that, and it's just, taking 3 months to learn about Carlisle because we're all more or less relatively new, but we don't just limit ourselves and we kind of hit the ground running and just crash course in Carlisle, more or less, just because it feels very limiting to me to be like, we're talking to people today, and I'm like, but I don't know how to do that because I'm a historian, all the people I talk about are dead, so if we just let ourselves learn, and that is the truth telling. But I don't know how anybody else feels about that on my rant, but
That was kind of how I understood your proposal, though, Emily, was like a comprehensive truth telling, right? We're identifying current state no matter how we get there. So I'm with you in that understanding.
Raph, are we getting to you outlined 2 strategies, this or this. Are we getting to that? And can you outline? Okay.
Yeah, so we're having that conversation.
I'm sorry, I hate to interrupt you, but you had an idea about us pulling up the document, and we do actually have the Wi-Fi password now that Stephanie would be able to share with us if that's going to be helpful for our process.
Good. So, so we have it available now, you said?
I believe so. Stephanie, are you
Yeah, we'll
there?
have to take I have it. It'll just take a couple minutes to get everyone set up and see if it works. So that'll. Do you want to take like a brief pause in the meeting while I do that?
Raph, how helpful do you think that will be for us to get back in there?
Yeah. So my thought is the question that we're deciding doesn't actually depend on those matters. But yeah, so that's at least my own independent assessment.
No problem.
Okay.
Let's roll.
Good. So
Thanks anyway, Steph.
yeah. So that's something for the first suggestion. The only caution I have about that and why I propose a different one is just that I don't actually think that that's going to narrow things at all, because I think that all the things that we mentioned, law enforcement issues, education issues, socioeconomic disparities, we're going to find all those things in the history. Like, all of those things are going to be there. That's why we thought about them in the first place. And so I still don't know how that's going to do the work that we want to do, namely figuring out what are the things that we should focus on. Because my own feeling is, like, we can't do all of those things well. So that we still are going to have to prioritize. But maybe
Okay.
my suspicion is incorrect.
So the two options are collect information, then decide priorities, or decide priorities and collect information. And you're making an argument for decide priorities and collect information. And I think it's a compelling one that, we don't want to seem like we're being irresponsible, but at the same time, we very strongly suspect that we're going to find out that the things we think people care about are the things they care about. Well, that's the question. What do we think? What direction should this go in?
Yeah, I'm very much for collect and then decide, just because I am not also in a marginalized community, and I understand the power I have, and I don't want to come in and be like, here are the 3 problems you have, and then they may be the 3 problems we find out when we look at stuff, and it might feel like a waste of time, but at least we're informed. Just because I had recently gone to a lecture on the Latin American community in York County, and she said, don't write a history about us if you're not going to talk to us. And that rang very true for me, that I don't want to come in and, decide things for people when I'm not listening to them, even if I'm listening to somebody 150 years ago. And that's just something I personally feel strongly about. If everybody else is like, no, let's decide and then go, I'm not gonna dig my heels in that much, but that is just something to think about, that we don't want to be continuing to write a story for people when we're trying to solve issues. And that's not an easy answer by December 2022 either, but just my thoughts there.
And not only that, I think that we shouldn't talk to the same people who have been talked to over and over again. There are certain people to whom leaders always go to for input, right? And I'm not saying that their voice is not important. I'm saying let's add to their voice. Let's talk to some other people. And a lot of us sitting up here, all of us sitting up here, we all know different people in the community, who will definitely have something to add. So I think that's important as well.
I'm also for the collect and then prioritize. I think it's low risk to, part of this is truth telling. So even if we collect 3 months worth of information and it hasn't helped us prioritize, that's still 3 good months of information. We could still have an ad hoc session where we then say, okay, well, all these things are valid. We can narrow it down from there. But I don't think there's any harm in gearing more towards the truth telling side first and just sitting back and listening.
I agree, and I think you're right, Raph. We'll probably end up at the same place at the end of the day. However, I still am, from my opinion, it's the most appropriate thing to do is to listen and then prioritize, as opposed to the other way around.
Tawanda?
I think I'm in the minority. But I think we have data available to us now that comes from Deputy Mayor Schultz's report that can help kind of guide where our truth seeking starts to run.
That's actually, I was trying to actually suggest a decide, collect, redecide process. Collect on the basis of the report that we saw, and then
Okay.
see if we get any new results that make us think, oh, we should narrow down that initial set of topics because of the 5 things presented in that report. People seem to really care about these 3 things, or there's a 4th thing that didn't come up in that report that our research reveals is really interesting and deserves some attention. So we could think of the strategy. We could think of another choice. There's collect, decide. There's decide, collect. There's preliminarily decide, collect, more permanently decide.
I'm number 3.
Yeah, I think that, and I think that's kind of what we're gonna do. And it might be in our first meeting where we were talking about how to reach the people that aren't gonna believe things are happening. Remember, that was a very big conversation, and I think just kind of diving right into it and deciding those people are gonna be like, well, that doesn't happen, and you're gonna be like, well, here's the information we've gathered. So I think being like, okay, here's some stuff we're probably gonna find, and then you read the stuff and you're like, have found it, confirmed. I think that kind of preliminary decide, collect, and then solidify decision, but we'll at least also have, the backup to show people like, no, here's where it's happening. It's not just something we made up to make a problem to solve. So I think that'll be important just to have that backing, so we, don't just be like, well, no, it happened. It did. We'll have, here's systematic things that are happening. So I think, we have an idea, and I think we've already done that soft decision, and then we just look at it to confirm, and then give it the check at the end of 3 months if that's what we go with.
Do we think we have consensus? Should we move on to the next agenda item?
If I can just add, so it sounds like we might be approving the mission and bylaws separate from the action plan, and that the action plan might take an additional 2 weeks before we're able to vote on that and send that to council. Do I understand that right?
I think that's the way we anticipated coming into the meeting, because we,
Okay.
had those as voting items. So, so yeah, we definitely will probably have to do some work, some re-looking at this informally behind the scenes and in preparation for the next meeting.
I have 2 quick questions, just to make sure that I know what we're doing for going forward. So one question is kind of what generally we're doing, and we have come to something like a consensus where it looks like some preliminarily do a little bit of deciding, and then 3 months of research, and then reconsideration. So that's what we've decided. But my first question is, so what do we write up in the action plan? Does it look like the 2 sentences that I said before, which are really, really high level, but they perfectly capture what we're trying to do? Or do we try to write things in a more granular way for the purposes of just writing something up that we approve and then send to council for the discussion? Just to know like what the task is. Do we want something like that? That's my first question. Do we want to decide that?
Could we simply add the clause, use data made available by Borough Council to... Would that work?
Oh, yeah.
And I mean, based on this conversation, I'm comfortable with Raf. Like if you have things that you want to bounce off of us through Google Doc, that's cool. But I mean, just based on this conversation, I'm trusting the process enough that we might have just something to look at and kind of go with. That makes sense.
Yeah, and then my second question is just, so if we've decided on this decide, decide, collect, decide, model. Have we actually made any decisions? And I take it the answer to that is no, because I don't know what those decisions would have been.
I think the decision is to take the topic areas, the starting topic areas, as those delineated in the League of Women Voters PowerPoint presentation. And so I think we have, if we don't have access to that, we can get access to that. But that's the decision. Does that make sense as a decision? That we just won't question those as starting points. Those areas of concern that were identified in that report are the ones that we'll take as the most pressing until until and if our data collection efforts reveal a different picture.
I think that's really good and helpful, Emily, and let me tell you why. Part of, following the timeline of how we got to the place of establishing a Truth and Reconciliation Commission came from the town hall, and that's where that data was debuted. So it really, helps to tie things together that that data helps to inform our work as a commission. So I think I see Deputy Mayor Schultz is connected. I'm just wondering if we can just ask him to send that to us in PowerPoint, and then maybe with any commentary that he may have as far as data that wasn't included, maybe slides or information that he left out, and for whatever reason that he may have left out certain information that wasn't, as part of the presentation. We feel like that's helpful. Maybe not for developing the action plan, but at least kind of help guiding what the more syllabi information looks like.
And I'm also wondering if Deputy Mayor Schultz has within their repository somewhere a sample action plan that perhaps a past commission or some other established entity presented, just like we got for the bylaws that really helped with putting that together. So at least we could get some baseline understanding of what the expectation might be versus that one page versus 30. That might tell us a lot if we see what some prior work that was approved looked like.
I can certainly. I think I have a non-trimmed down version of the presentation, and I can see if we can dig up another action plan that I think maybe the Human Relations Commission may have done something like that, but I'll have to confirm. I think that's probably about the only body that may have done something like what you're talking about doing tonight.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, are we ready to move on to the next item? Okay, Tawanda, take it away. Racial Justice Alliance.
Thank you, Emily. So I won't belabor this point. I think probably if I had my druthers, I'd be in person with you all to sort of kick this off. So there is, in the borough, there are many different groups who are working toward racial equity and working toward racial justice. And there's, a lot of groups sort of doing this work. Recently, there's been, an alliance that has taken place between two nonprofit organizations inside the borough. Let me also say that this may not have been of any concern to this commission, except for some unique situations and circumstances with which the borough is intricately involved. So there is a nonprofit organization that's located in the borough of Carlisle. It's a 20-year-old organization that was formed in the recognition that folks who live, in either the Zone 5 or Memorial Park area would, primarily people of color, would need extra supports, extra services, would need sort of a more of a community approach around them to help them succeed, to stabilize, become self-sufficient, all of those sorts of things. So that organization exists. So there's an alliance between that organization and the local YWCA for there to be enhanced programming around racial justice initiatives, and that's good. The problem is that the problem, as I see it, is that there appears to be some steps that are taking or have already taken, are being taken, that would put these two organizations together in ways that they haven't been before. And the reason that I'm bringing that to this commission is this is the same neighborhood where you've heard the story of the Lincoln Cemetery. So it's the same neighborhood. It's 50 years later. And I think it's our due diligence, as well as the borough's due diligence, to really examine the ways in which the needs of the community, i.e. Black people, are still being met and are being not co-opted and not removed, right? That processes are transparent, that an organization by Black people for Black people remains that way at whatever cost, if there is a cost, just to really look at things for what they are. I think that's part of the work of this commission. I think that's something that sort of like how we, the school district had an issue and we kind of, looked at what that means for the work that we do. I think this is similar work. The way that the borough is tied to this is that the organization is housed out of the train station in Memorial Park, which is borough property, and that organization also receives borough funding. So essentially what could be happening is that funding would leave a Black organization and go to a white organization to do the work that the Black organization has been doing, if I could just put it in real short sentences. So I don't know that that's anything that we hammer out tonight. I don't know that it's anything that we find solutions for tonight. I doubt it. I'm just merely putting it out here as something that we want to pay attention to. Maybe we want to have some more conversations. Maybe we want to get some more information. Maybe we want to have some truth-seeking opportunities to really find out what's really taking place, what's really happening. Is the cemetery issue happening again in different ways? So that's kind of what I'm throwing out there. We can discuss it more. We can discuss it later. We can discuss it now. That's it. I can't see you all because I can only see myself. But
so I can add, a lot of what's being stated is actually at this point still privileged information. And so when I speak to it, I'm going to be very vague. There will be press releases. It is important to also note that this organization historically is not a Black organization. It was actually founded by a white man for, the community, which of course included, Black men and women and children, but others as well. And it's also just important to note that this process that is taking place is also being overseen and by lawyers. So there's nothing sinister or there's nothing shady, to use, for lack of a better word, going on. And again, because it's privileged information, that's about all I can say to that in public. So,
but in full transparency, Doreen is a board member of that organization. Mm-hmm. So there are ways that she's not able to share information. The information that I have, I'm not on the board. my only purpose in saying, what I'm saying here tonight is this something that I feel like this is something that is worth more conversation and is worth us, like I said, I don't think, going back and forth here tonight is really going to do us any good. But I do think, as far as the borough is concerned, we are also concerned with the ways in which monies, CDBG funding is given to an organization, building usage is given to an organization. To the degree to which that changes becomes the work of this group. Is that something that we want to have more conversation about? Do we want to get more information about? So, for example, as Doreen has said, that there's lawyers involved. Okay, who are the lawyers? Like, I feel like there's layers to this that we could have, and I don't think that information is really what we want to get into the weeds tonight. My purpose of sharing it today is saying, here's something, privileged or not. I think enough people know sort of what's going on. It's on the table. We can have conversations about it. And the truth is part of what this work is.
I would just say, again, I'm between a hard, what is it, rock and a hard place. I have a splitting headache, so please forgive me. I don't think this is the forum for it.
I think one thing that this commission could consider is the general question of the borough's budget and how many of its dollars go towards supporting the causes of combating racism and inequality. So I think that's a general question that certainly we could consider, and maybe that would get us away from the specifics of this case.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I think that what we are, we're doing research, we're doing analysis, we're doing recommendations. We're not really doing advocacy. That's not really a part of our charge. I don't believe it is. So I think we have to be really careful not to cross that line when it's not a part of our charge. But that doesn't mean we can't pay attention. Doesn't mean we can't generally talk about the issues, and it doesn't mean that it can't end up in our recommendation report that these types of issues may be problematic for disenfranchised communities because blah, 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 blah. So, we may still address it, but just in a different way and at a different time.
I just had an observation to make. So the observation is the thought that we should pay attention to what the borough spends money on and doesn't spend money on, and maybe figure out, are there money's not going to certain marginalized communities. This is the observation is just that this is the kind of there's so much information to be found, and this is why prioritization is so key about what it is that we want to find, because that's one other piece of information that we could be spending a lot of time finding out about, and that is, so far as I've understood what our last conversation wrapped, that's not part of it. We're not gonna find out things like that, and that's why I thought maybe if there are things like this that we do think are important issues that were not mentioned, say, at this public meeting beforehand, they're important, why it's important for us as a group to just think about what are the things that we care about. Anyways, that's just an observation. I have no thoughts about what we should do about this particular issue.
I think borough budgets are a big enough issue that we might want to consider that part of our preliminary decision to drive the information collection, to then drive the more permanent decision. So we could add examination of budgets.
Added.
Thank you.
Tawanda, do you feel satisfied that we've discussed item C? Anything else?
I do. I just wish. I think the budget is of concern, but I think oftentimes when we look at the work of Truth and Reconciliation, that it's easy for us to look at disproportionate minority contact for law enforcement It's easy for us to look at education and look at scholarship opportunities, or the gifted program and how many of our kids are in that like these quantifiable quantitative data is really easy. This instance isn't as easy, right? This situation is a little bit more analytical and a little bit more examining systems and structures to really determine, how it is that organizations and institutions function systemically and structurally. And I think that's what some of the work of this commission is. Easy, no. Laid out, on a syllabi, no. But I still think it's a necessary work. And I don't know that I have the answers for that work. But I do feel like it's worth looking at what that all means. So when I did the video for Lincoln Cemetery, one of the questions that I was asked was how I felt about racial relations in the borough of Carlisle. And my response was that Carlisle has a way, and not just council, but the community in general has a way of conducting business and conducting themselves and ourselves in ways that meet the letter of the law. But they have a certain undertone or undercarriage with them that carries with them a system that supports white supremacy and that supports racism in many different facets. I believe in this situation, it looks like Black organizations are not capable of recovering themselves. Black organizations are not capable of being their own fiduciary or being their own fiduciary oversight or their own administrative oversight. That matters. I've seen mergers before. I've seen this sort of merger before. And I can tell you in my years of human service and nonprofit work, that these sorts of situations at this stage that they're in right now are worth taking another look at because of the long-term impacts that they have on the communities that they serve. So I think it's just something for us to pay attention to, that it may not rise to the level of an illegality. It may not even rise to the level of impropriety, but I always feel like it's best to shun even the appearance of impropriety so that you can move forward in an anti-racist society, so that you can move forward in ways that battle against white supremacist structures. I feel that the community of Carlisle has not had systemic and structural change for so long that we allow things to continue to perpetuate because we don't recognize when there's something in front of us that needs to happen or can happen that can help to put a halt to some of those systems and structures. So that's a long-winded answer of was I finished talking about it? I just feel like there's opportunities for us to look at things a little bit deeper. And I think it's up to us to take advantage of those opportunities to look at things a little deeper, just to make sure that things are not even rising to the level of the appearance of impropriety. I'm going on mute. Thank you.
You said a lot there. I don't want to drag this out, but I can tell you there's nothing improper taking place. Nothing.
Doreen, I'm just gonna put a pause. When I say impropriety, what I mean is the appearance of white supremacy or racism. And I don't think you or I have the ability to say that definitively. We don't. This is the work of the commission, is examining systems and structures. I can't say to anyone that you're not behaving racist or that you are behaving racist. Part of the work of the Truth and Reconciliation is bringing ourselves to a point of truth seeking so that we're able to say, wow, yeah, that really was the best thing.
So here's my final take. This has become a personal thing for you, and I think it's now bleeding into the commission. And I don't think it's fair to all of us here.
I think we've got a lot of things we need to get to.
Yeah.
I'm new to the
let's
community,
move
so
on.
I certainly appreciate being brought up to speed on these things. And I think we have consensus that this commission can address issues of the borough budget generally. And I think we have to leave it at that for now. The next item on our agenda is public comment. There are no folks in the audience tonight, but Stephanie, do we have anyone on Zoom over there?
If
Oh,
anyone
great.
on the Zoom call would like to say anything, just raise your hand and we'll unmute you. And no takers.
Okay, well, we'll check that off our list. The next thing is we have 2 items for a vote. We've had a long time to look at these, so I'm kind of assuming that this will go pretty quickly. Would anyone like to make a motion to approve the final version of the bylaws?
I so move.
Member Donaldson moves. Anyone second?
I'll second. Oh, okay.
Member Wilbur seconds. Any comments or questions? Discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. The bylaws are approved. The next item is the mission statement. Would anyone like to move that we approve the mission statement?
I move that we approve it, the mission statement.
Second.
Excellent. So Member Wilbur moves, Member Isaac seconds. Any discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Okay, the ayes have it. Our mission statement is approved. I assume that those things will be passed on to the next party. Councilmember Stubbe or Deputy Mayor Schultz. I know the next step is that the Borough Council has to look at those things. I'll send a clean copy of both things just in case. The next thing is announcements and future meeting schedules. So we have a social event coming up on, let's see here. Where am
Tuesday.
I? Tuesday the 13th.
Yes.
And then we have a public meeting on Monday the 19th. So we're back to our Monday time, 6 p.m. We'll be back here in Town Hall. Zoom capabilities will be here. As we all know, moving forward, we need the quorum to be met by in-person attendees. Fred, question?
Clarification.
Yeah.
Next public meeting is the 19th.
Is the 19th.
And the other meeting you mentioned,
The social meeting is the 13th.
there's an echo here.
Sure.
What is it you're calling that meeting on the 13th?
A social outing. No business. Just a social outing.
Oh, okay.
And are there any other announcements?
Just one note, I will not be here on the 19th. I'm going out of town. I don't think I'll be able to zoom in that day from where I'll be, but just so you're aware for that I won't be around.
Thank you. That is helpful to know. All right. Well, it is 7:28. I call this meeting to a close. We are adjourned.